Hello, today we're going to talk about the Renaissance art in Italy, and we'll start with Proto-Renaissance. That is a transitional moment from medievalism to the main principles of Renaissance. So here we can see the Renaissance art periodization. We should pay our attention to these terms like duecento, trecento, quattrocento, cinquecento. So what does it mean? These are Italian terms that means these centuries. It means that it's, for example, duecento, the root du, it means two, so it means 1200 or 13th century. Then trecento, it means three, or in other words 1300 and 14th century. These, by the way, 13th and 14th centuries, these are Proto-Renaissance. Then Quattrocento is early Renaissance period. Cinquecento, we'll see it's high Renaissance period, it's like the heyday of it. And there is also late Renaissance period that lasted up to the second half of the 16th century. And so firstly, let's consider what happened to art in general, what were the main changes. So we'll notice here, as we know it from like general laws of life, of even of nature, that nothing comes from nowhere. It's the first point. And another thing is that all the historical facts, all the historical periods, they are not something that happened in a moment. These periods that formed throughout some time, some period. And that's the reason why we do not have some particular date when people were living according to the principles and morality of medievalism period, and suddenly in a day they just started thinking of humanism, for example, and they decided that they should return to antiquity traditions. This was a long process in history, and we'll notice it in the creativity of such kind of artists as Simone Martini, for example. Simone Martini was the major figure in the development of early Italian painting, and in his art we'll see the influences of international Gothic style, and of course the basement of his icon paintings are Byzantine tradition, Byzantine canon of sacred art. What's the difference between Byzantine icon paintings and this Proto-Renaissance and later on early Renaissance artworks on the Bible subject? So the difference is that we can notice here some aesthetics return to the antiquity. We'll see that there is more attention paid to the three-dimensional depiction of figures, of draperies of clothes, for example. Also the way how the faces, the hands of saints were depicted, also more in a more volume. Then we can notice at the same time that there are some principles that are typical for that are still the same comparing to traditional icon painting. So we can notice here golden background that symbolize the presence of God, that symbolize the eternal heavenly space. We can also see the ground, so it's all very formal. We can see that there is such kind of contrast between quite almost three-dimensional draperies of angels figure and this very smooth, this flat surface of the background. So that only increase the feeling of three-dimensional front ground. Also, we can notice that Simone Martini was really interested in depicting all the details, and that's also the way that led him to high decorativeness. Simone spent several years in Assisi, Pisa and Orvieto, and only occasionally he returned to Siena for very brief periods during which he worked in Palazzo Pubblico. And here we can see his most famous masterpieces of monumental art. Work was created during his second Siena period, and let's consider now the frescoes inside of Palazzo Pubblico. These images, they were committed by government of Siena, and the central composition, let's look at it attentively. It is called Maesta. Maesta is translated as Magnificence, so like praying and worshiping the Virgin Mary with the child, with Jesus Christ. So the main topic here is the depiction of the Virgin in the central part of the composition. She's surrounded by different people, saints, by the angels who are praying to her, and also we pay our attention to the frame decorated with 20 medallions depicting the blessing Jesus Christ, the prophets, and the evangelists, and we also noted here smaller shields containing the coat of arms of Siena. The fresco shows a host of angels, saints, and apostles with the Madonna and Child in the center. So the whole scene, set against the deep blue background, is surrounded by the imposing canopy of red silk. The most obvious innovations present in Simone's style are the ideas of three-dimensional space, as we have already mentioned. So the supporting poles of the canopy are placed in perspective, thus giving a sense of depth to the composition. Under the canopy there is a crowd of 30 people here. It's quite clear that Simone Martini was really familiar with the perspective construction. He used the perspective effects to create some sort of three-dimensional space. His art also contains a personal interpretation of elements of the French Gothic. So, for example, here in this artwork we can see pointed arch, structures of the throne, the precious ornamentation of the materials, and the golden reflections give the whole scene the some special secular mood. And here we can see some fragments of the central part of the composition. We should also notice that here the various materials were used, like glass, for example, like tin. Everything that is not tempera or colored earth are all handled with great confidence by Simone. Simone Martini owed a great deal to the work of Siena goldsmith. The Gothic shapes and the sophisticated and shining surfaces were undoubtedly influenced by the artifacts produced in the workshops of goldsmith artisans, who decorated the most precious metals with a new technique of translucid enamels. Here we can notice that this artwork, that is, by the way, very typical for Proto-Renaissance period, that it is really highly decorative, and not only because of the combination of three-dimensional front ground and flattened background, but also because of the usage of different materials. These combinations, they always give us an opportunity to talk about some decorative special effects. Also, the artist paid attention to different patterns, so that what makes this artwork really look precious, like it's really all the sort of work of jeweler. We should also pay our attention to the harmony of colors used here. So this is the classical combination of red, yellow, and blue. And different tones, different hints of these colors. But what is special, that the colors are not too bright, they are very gentle, and they are really able to create this wonderful harmonious melody of colors. Here is the Annunciation and the two saints. This beautiful Annunciation was painted around 1333 by Simone Martini and his brother-in-law Lippo Menni for the altar of St. Ansano in the Cathedral of Siena. The autograph of the two painters is immortalized in the Latin inscription below. The work is considered an absolute masterpiece and one of the greatest examples of Siena Gothic painting, characterized by the wonderful elegance of both line and color. In this artwork, we can see the features of international Gothic style, which developed by the end of the 14th century. This style is noted for extreme linearity in painting. This meant flowing curves, which gives the effect of elegance and refinement. And now let's say some words about the subject itself. So, Annunciation, it is called by the fathers of the Church the starting point of the saving of humanity by Jesus Christ. So that was a moment when Archangel Gabriel proclaimed to the Virgin Mary that she is going to be a mother for the Lord here on earth. And we can see that this moment it has some special attributes. For example, in the central part of the composition, we can see a vessel fulfilled with pure water as usual. It means that. So it's golden here. In this artwork, and there are some white flowers. Traditionally, these are white lilies that are symbol of virginity of Mary. We can also notice that there is a fragment of skies surrounded by angels, and here in the central part of it we can see the image of white dove that is straightening to the Virgin, and that means this impregnation from the Holy Spirit here. And this is the symbol. I remind you, the white dove that we understand as the Holy Spirit, it's also based totally on the Bible text. And there is no way for artists' imagination only. So all such kind of symbols, they have the meaning, they have the fundament in the sacred text of Bible. So also we can see on the sides the images of two saints, and the decorative effect is also enforced by this framing with some relief elements that are typical for Gothic architecture. Another artist is Giannino di Beppo Cimabue. So this was an Italian painter and designer of mosaics from Florence. Although heavily influenced by Byzantine models, Cimabue is generally regarded as one of the first great Italian painters to break from the Italian Byzantine style. While medieval art then was scenes and forms that appeared relatively flat and highly stylized, Cimabue's figures were depicted with more advanced, lifelike proportions and shading than other artists of his time. According to Italian painter and historian Giorgio Vasari, Cimabue was the teacher of Giotto. According to Vasari, quoting a contemporary, he was a contemporary of Cimabue. So Cimabue of Florence was a painter who lived during the author's own time, a nobler man than anyone knew, but he was as a result so haughty and proud that if someone pointed out to him any mistake or defect in his work, or if he had noted any himself, he would immediately destroy the work, no matter how precious it might be. So his nickname, Ceni di Beppo, translated as bald head, but also possibly as one who crushes the views of others. So that was the person with the character. Most of his frescoes we'll see in the transept of the Church of San Francesco. And here is the icon painting, painted in a traditional technique on a wooden panel. It's depicting Virgin and Child in glory, surrounded by 6 angels. So again, we can notice this very colorful palette of bright color combinations that gives us the effect of a rainbow and the presence of God. We can notice that the artist paid attention to depiction of the draperies in a lifelike way, to all the figures' proportions. At the same time, he left the canonical composition that was widespread in Byzantine period. In Cimabue's fresco depicting crucifixion that was created from 1277 to 1280, we can see that there is, of course, the basement of Byzantine tradition, but there is something very special, very new. So we can notice the great dynamicism in the composition. We can notice that the artist is paying attention to the emotions of heroes that are depicted here. At the same time, the figure seems to be dematerialized because of the very modest color palette. The next artworks by Cimabue depicting Jesus Christ from this is the fragment from the depiction of Apocalypse fresco, and another fragment is Madonna on the throne. Also, fragments Madonna surrounded by angels and Saint Francis. Here, for example, the Byzantine canonical iconography of Christ Pantocrator used, and we also can notice that there are some anatomy proportions, anatomy clear proportions depicted, and please let's pay our attention to feet. So they are really perfectly drawn, and we should remember that drawing is the basement for painting. Now let's consider Maesta, painted by another artist, Duccio di Buonsegna. So Maesta, let's repeat it. It is the Italian word for majesty. This designates an iconic formula of the enthroned Madonna with the child Jesus, whether or not accompanied with angels and saints. The Maesta is an extension of Mary Theotokos, or Mary Mother of God. The enthroned Christ that is familiar in Byzantine mosaics. So Maesta's iconography basement is again canonical icon painting. The Maesta with 20 angels and 19 saints by Duccio is an altarpiece composition that is composed of many separate paintings, separate compositions. On the back of Maestas there are episodes from the life of Christ, focusing on his passions. Another genie of the Proto-Renaissance epoch is Giotto di Bondone, who was born circa 2067 and died in 1337. He is better known simply as Giotto. He was an Italian painter and architect from Florence. He is generally considered the first in the line of great artists who contributed to the Italian Renaissance. Giotto's contemporary Giovanni Villani wrote that Giotto was the most sovereign master of painting in his time, who drew all his figures and their postures according to nature. The later 16th century biographer Giorgio Vasari says of him, he made a decisive break with the Byzantine style and brought to life the great art of painting as we know it today, introducing the technique of drawing accurately from life, which had been neglected for more than 200 years. So Giotto's masterwork is the decoration of the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, commonly called the Arena Chapel. It was completed around 1305. So what about Giotto? By the way, here in the slide we can see the portrait detail of painting the 5 founders of Florentine art. The artwork of the 15th century, the end of it, or the beginning of the 16th century. Giotto here combined the form of painting that displaced the Byzantine style and established painting as the major form of art for the next 6 centuries. He was often credited as the father of Western pictorial art. He restored the naturalistic approach invented by ancient Romans and that was abandoned during the Middle Ages, and established a method of pictorial expressions based on observation that might be called early scientific. So in his creativity, firstly, one of his main artworks is a cycle of frescoes in Scrovegni Chapel or Cappella dell'Arena in Padua. The Arena Chapel gets its name from the Roman amphitheater that is nearby and was built for a local Paduan merchant. The design of the building is so perfectly fits the illusion that it is suggested that Giotto may have been the architect as well. So the rectangular barrel vault has the 6 narrow windows in its south wall only, which left the entire north wall unbroken and well illuminated surface for painting. So the result for such a large canvas on which to paint was completed was a complete pictorial cycle of Christian redemption so the artist created 38 framed pictures on 3 rows and 3 levels. We'll see that the top level contains images of Virgin Mary and her parents. The middle level contains imagery from the life and mission of Jesus Christ on earth. Then the bottom level depicts Christ's passion, crucifixion, and resurrection. The pictorial levels are on the neutral base with the imitation marble veneer, alternates with the virtues and vices painted in grisaille, so it means monochrome technique of painting, to resemble sculpture. By the way, this approach is famous from the antiquity times and can be seen also, for example, in early Christian centuries from the 1st to the 3rd centuries in Roman catacombs. Also, what is special about the interior of the chapel, the ceiling is blue. The azure sky symbolizes heaven. The same blue is found in the backgrounds of the panels and acts as an unifying effect. So the borders are complex and contrast the simple images they surround. And the figures are sculpturesque, they're simple and weighty, but this mass doesn't produce motion and emotion with postures and gestures expressing a broad spectrum of grief. Here is the wall decoration. We can see that though in this chapel there is no dome, for example, but all the pictures, all the depictions are located according to the main principle of the Christian church in general. So the highest point is usually for the Lord himself and the Lord. We remember still that in the domed building, in a domed church, there is always, so the central part is the round surface of the dome, and there are 4 pendentives on which we can always see the images of 4 evangelists, for example, or the images of 4 great prophets or sometimes angels. So according to the number of these architectural elements, pendentives. But in this case, though we don't see dome, we don't see pendentives here, it's only vault system, but the main principle of location of images remains the same here. The starry sky, it creates a wonderful picturesque and decorative effect because these are 2 colors like bright blue and golden color. They are so they make the effect of shining for the stars even bigger, so they increase this effect. And more than that, we can notice even that these stars, they have 8-pointed structure, and these are symbols not only of starry sky, of the universe, but these are symbols of Bethlehem star that once showed the Magi the way where the Savior was born. And now let's consider some elaborate scenes from Giotto's fresco cycle. Here, for example, we can see the Nativity from Scrovegni Chapel. Giotto was really innovator in his approach in art. To see the differences, to see the specificity of any sort of artwork, we should compare it to something that we already know. So, for example, here we should compare two Byzantine icon painting on the same subject, the Nativity, and we'll see that actually what's new here, that the artist, he got more freedom in placing the elements of the composition, the figures of saints, the figures of angels, for example. Their image in general is much more emotional, so we can see that as even the gestures of angels, it really shows the statement, the inner statement, the mood of the whole scenery. The next scenery, fresco presentation of Christ at the temple. This is a detail. So it represents another moment from the New Testament story. It describes the presentation of Jesus Christ to the Temple of Jerusalem according to the Jewish tradition. So after 40 days of the birth of Jesus, his Saint Mother Mary and Joseph, so they brought the child as redemption to the temple. And here we see that so we see Jesus Christ as the child, and we also see here Saint Simon or Simeon. So he was promised that he wouldn't see death until he see the Lord's Christ. So that's the moment, I can say very tender moment described here in this image. And again, the artist pays attention to the emotional side of the story. He also draws our attention to the glances, even to all the emotions that were usually hidden in traditional icon painting. Also, we can notice some special gesture described here. For example, the arms straightened on the two sides, and so some movement of the bodies. It's also quite new. Also, we can feel there here the attempt to depict a three-dimensional space and to get this more realistic depiction. Saint Simon is holding Jesus with his covered hands, and that is symbolically, that means the great level of worshipping, of respect. And this gesture with to take something or to give something with covered hands, it is coming from Byzantine Empire times, from the royal from the empire's court, when it was forbidden to give something or take to or give something to the emperor or take something from him with uncovered hands. So that's the message of honor. The fresco baptism of Jesus Christ, that is also the continuation of the series of gospel frescoes. We can see this moment that is described in the New Testament, and it is also called as theophania. It means the appearance of God. It means that for the first time in the Bible text, we see the Holy Trinity that showed themselves in its fullness. So because according to the sacred text, there is Jesus Christ, of course, then the Lord Father's voice was heard from heaven, from sky, and also everyone could see the white dove that was straightening to Jesus. And a white dove, according to the sacred text, is the symbol of the Holy Spirit. So the whole Trinity finally showed itself. And here, by the way, composition, Giotto di Mondone chose the composition that is quite close to Byzantine analogs. Again, the composition is centric. We can see that the main hero, Jesus, is depicted in the geometrically central part of the composition. The main heroes here are Jesus Christ and John the Baptist. Also, we can see the victims, the angels, with halos here. They also cover their hands with draperies, just again to underline this honor of worshipping of Jesus Christ. And they are waiting for, they're ready to dry Jesus Christ's body after the water Jordan. The color palette of Giotto's frescoes is quite natural, and it's quite tender, so we won't see here extremely bright and dark from the point of view of tonality colors. So these are predominantly blue, bright blue, white, or different ochres. Then he used pink, greenish color that is quite light in its tonality also, and this combination, it really creates this magnificent feeling of space, of extra space, that it seems to us that the chapel's inner space is getting even bigger looking at these frescoes. Here we can notice the effect of air perspective, again of linear perspective, that became one of the central features of the Renaissance art in general. One of the central compositions of the fresco cycle, Resurrection of Lazarus, is something that from one point of view also based on Byzantine icon painting canon, and from another point of view is fulfilled with many interesting details that create the effect of real life moment that takes place just right now. It seems to us when we look at it that we hear the speech of all these people, that we feel this movement, the energy, the emotions of sometimes of fear, of honor of Jesus Christ, because he made this 3 days dead man to resurrect and to keep on living. So that's what really artists of Renaissance period were eager to do. They were eager to create the effect of presence inside of this moment described in the Gospel. So they wanted to make the story closer to each person who was looking at these depictions, like if he was a victim of everything. And such kind of lifelike effect became possible not only because of perspective, but also thanks to different elements, such as, for example, so because of the depiction of all these people, of all the people with different characters, with different facial features. By the way, we can also see the difference from icon painting. There, as you remember, we could see the images of saints only depicted frontally, or only in some cases we could see three-quarter position, like turning to the central part, for example, in praying to the Lord. But here we notice that everyone is depicted just in any sort of position. It only depends on the artist's will and on his general idea. Even the Lord himself is depicted here in profile. In canonical icon painting, it's really impossible, because profile depictions are usually for depicting some evil forces. And why does it happen here? What's the reason for that? The main reason is the purpose of the image. So if in canonical icon painting the purpose is to pray, to create some special atmosphere for for praying, for concentration. Then here it's more like illustration of the Bible scenery. These compositions, they should remind people about the story itself, to refresh it in people's mind. And for this purpose, by the way, in the Renaissance period, we'll see that some additional heroes in frescoes, in other easel depictions on sacred topics, they sometimes were depicted in clothes that is typical for, not for the times of Jesus Christ's earthly life, but typical for the Renaissance period itself. So that's what we can notice here in the composition Christ entering Jerusalem. According to the Gospel, this event took place before the Last Supper, and it marked the beginning of Jesus Christ's Passion. So it is like the starting point of the future passions of the resurrection that are celebrated during the Holy Week. So Jesus entered Jerusalem because he understood, he knew that he should complete his ministry. And he made this grand entrance into the city on a donkey to fulfill the prophecy. So we see that the crowds gathered around Jesus Christ, and so they believed that he was the next king, the next emperor, who is going to give them all the necessary political, social changes they were so much expecting. And they had no idea that Jesus Christ's kingdom was not on earth, it was in heavens. So the crowd lay their clothes on the ground to welcome him, and also they put on the ground trunks of palm trees. That's what we can see in the upper part of composition. So these people are just going to do that. And why this moment is really tragic? Firstly, of course, because it is the starting point of Jesus Christ's passion, his sacrifice. Another thing is that the crowd that at this moment described in this fresco, they are greeting Jesus, they are welcoming him. Then in some days, probably the same people from this crowd would demand his death. And here is the fresco that is considered being the masterpiece by Giotto. So we see Giotto's interpretation of Judas' kiss. After the Last Supper in the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas identifies Jesus for the Roman soldiers by kissing him. In the center of the composition we see Judas in yellow robes, as he envelopes Jesus with an intimate embrace. The two men lock eyes as angry soldiers carrying weapons lie in wait. Christ is perfect and beautiful, and Jesus is ugly here. Clothes can't hide it. The cloak of Judah on the fresco is considered one of the great pictorial achievements of Giotto. First, no one before him depicted grasping clothes so placidly, describing the contours of the body and conveying the swiftness of the movement. And secondly, the most interesting compositional decision by Giotto was to depict the cloak of Judas so that he almost completely covered Christ, as if absorbing him. A lot of what we see in the Kiss of Judas appears for the first time in the history of painting. For the first time, for example, the artist depicts what they will later call the duel of views. For the first time, the finished icon painting canon, which came from Byzantine painting, was replaced by realistic sketch, by realistic approach, full of drama and excitement. For the first time, a crowd looks so brightly inharmonious. The apostle took out the bread knife and in an affection cuts off the ear of the guard. Here is this element of composition. The priest in the foreground points with his finger, and he said, "Take him." Someone turned his back. Pull someone near by for clothes. So the guard next to Judah in the high black helmet, in a crash, tapped on the leg next to him. And someone, probably an angel, in the background already blows a horn, anticipating Christ's resurrection. Bearded and beardless, dark and fair-haired, with individual different proportions. So all the heroes of this composition are really different. The clothes of different colors is depicted here, and also different shapes. They demonstrate how interested Italian art was in depicting the realism in general. So the biblical frescoes of Italian Giotto di Bondone were so different from the Byzantine Greek iconographic canon that the artist and the theorist of this 14th and 15th centuries, Cennino Cennini, he remarked that Giotto's translated the Bible from Greek into Latin. The next fresco in the cycle is crucifixion depiction. This is detail. So we see that the composition is symmetrical. Jesus Christ's figure and the cross itself, it covers the predominant part of the composition. What is quite new here comparing to Byzantine icons again? So the composition looks quite the same, but again, emotions of heroes, especially we should pay our attention to the images in the upper part of the composition, these angels that are even tearing the clothes on themselves. Just the artist used this approach to show the highest peak of suffering, even of angels. In the lower part of composition, we can see such the depictions of such kind of heroes that whose names we even know from the New Testament text. So here, for example, the Virgin Mary, she fainted, and she is held by the two. So she is supported by John, the theologian, the youngest pupil of Jesus Christ, and also by Mary Cleope. She was the sister of the Virgin Mary. According to a sacred text, she was the daughter of Joseph from his first marriage. And here we can clearly tell that this is Mary Magdalene depicted because of some iconographic features. She's usually depicted without any particular hairdo, like uncovered hair. And so all the heroes are depicted here in suffering, in great sadness. And on the right side of the composition there are soldiers and some other victims. Their emotional statement differs from those people depicted on the left side of composition. Under the cross there is a hole in the ground with the depiction of a skull and bones. These are images of bones of the first man, Adam, and from symbolical point of view it means that first in human history falling from grace by Adam and Eve was redeemed by Jesus Christ's crucifixion. The composition Resurrection has another famous title, Noli me tangere, that is translated from Latin as Do not touch me. So this composition describes a moment just after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Actually, for example, in Catholic Church and Orthodox churches, this moment is usually depicted totally differently. For example, here in Western European tradition, we can see the depiction just after the moment of resurrection, though it is not described in the Bible. And in Orthodox tradition, we could see the descent of Jesus Christ into hell, just instead of Noli me tangere. So here we can see that the first person The composition Noli me tangere is more typical for Western European countries. It describes the moment just after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Here we can see the kneeled figure of Mary Magdalene. She was the first victim, she was the first person who saw Jesus after his resurrection, and she was so impressed by seeing her favorite teacher that she wanted to touch him, she wanted to hug him, but he stopped her in this motion and told her, "Do not touch me." After this phrase, Jesus Christ added that he explained why, because he hadn't he hadn't reached his father yet at that moment, and so then he told Mary Magdalene to go to other brothers, to his brothers, to his pupils, it meant, and to let them know that to let them know about his resurrection. So some interesting elements are added here in the composition to make it more alive-like. So these here, for example, are the soldiers sleeping at the tomb of Jesus Christ. Here are two angels that were victims of the Lord's resurrection. And Jesus Christ here in his iconography is depicted, we can see, in totally white and golden color of clothes. That also means purity. That means he is already the part of the heavenly space. And he's holding the white flag. White flag is always the symbol of victory, symbol of peace, symbol of victory of the eternal life against death. And now let's talk about Bardi Chapel decoration, fresco cycle, The Life of Saint Francis by Giotto di Bondone, that was created from 1320 to 1330. So here we'll see the cycle of 28 scenes from the life of Saint Francis of Assisi in the nave of the upper church, and also the Franciscan virtues and some other frescoes in the lower church. So these churches are the main of the Franciscan order. They are located in the city of Assisi in Italy. The church itself, as we can notice it, has some features of medieval architecture, especially, for example, the arcade semicircular used here, also the window rows that is typical for the Gothic period, and also we can see the triangle fronton here and the vaulting system inside of the church. The color palette used here by Giotto is also quite recognizable. It is basing on predominantly the usage of blue, bright blue color, and also different ochres and reddish. The murals are distinguished by new artistic solutions made by the artist in Italian painting. The three-dimensional world, volunteer and tangible, is victoriously depicted here by Masterius' artist brush. So we also can see that the symbolism of Byzantine art was rejected in Giotto's cycle of frescoes. Higher simplicity is typical for this depiction, nothing superfluous. All the artist's attention is focused on the main thing, and a synthesis is given here, a grandiose generalization. So that's according to the words of art historians. When creating the iconography, the artist replied on Legenda Major, a biography of Saint Francis, written in 2066, and other three biographies written by Brother Thomas of Celano. It was the new vision of space in its interpretation which it received in Assisi that found an intimate and widest response. first in Italy and then especially from the second half of the Trecento, the 14th century, facing the need to depict almost modern events for which it would be impossible to resort to generalized clothes of biblical stories. Giotto dressed his secular characters in the dresses and clothes of his contemporaries. So that's what we have noticed from the previous fresco cycle. Also, what is typical for these depictions is that Giotto puts his heroes in the surrounding of architecture. By the way, architecture is very comfortable for showing, from the point of view of showing three-dimensional space, showing the perspective changes, linear perspective, I mean. And that's what the artists of the Renaissance will use widely in the later creativity. Here we see the death and ascension of Saint Francis, so the cycle really reflects, it's a fragment by the way, so the cycle reflects the life of the saint from the beginning until the end, and the most important sceneries were depicted here. This composition reminds us the Dormition of the Virgin, canonical for Byzantine times, where in the front ground we can see the person, Saint Francis himself, lying on the deathbed and surrounded by his followers, by his pupils that are mourning his death. And at the same time, the composition is divided into like two main parts. So the front ground with the main hero depicted, then the middle ground, and in the upper part we can see already the heavenly space with the depiction of Jesus Christ with the angels, and means that for this saint person the heavens are opened. So Proto-Renaissance period became the moment of transition between the medieval art of Romanesque tradition and of Gothic tradition to something generally and totally new, to Renaissance, to the revival of antiquity, aesthetics of antiquity principles in art. Though we can notice that the topics remain the same, so predominantly these were depictions on the Bible subject, but there happened something generally new from the point of view of stylistics of the composition. We can notice that the features of art are still about somehow copying Byzantine icon paintings of canonical depictions. But sometimes we can see a great variety of compositions and the attempt by the artist to show the three-dimensional space with the usage of perspective, linear and air perspective. But linear perspective was something that developed before the air perspective. The heroes are depicted here in various positions. There is no such kind of elaboration of elements of details in the compositions as we can see this in canonical icon painting. The artists got more freedom for choosing their artistic approach. And the purpose of this art is not to prey on these depictions, looking at them, but more to create some special atmosphere of presence, of being victims of those biblical events. And one feature that also helped in this was to depict people in the clothes of the contemporaries of artists.